Christ is risen. Christ has risen indeed. This is Easter Sunday. It is the most joyous day in our church year. It's the day when we recognize that the world has no power. God is the power. God is the power over death. God is the power over sadness, of pain, of sorrow. This is a day when we look at scriptures and we have a miraculous story to share and to tell. Now, it's not a day to get bogged down on the history of it or the science of it or anything that Westerners kind of get tripped up in. This is a day for a spiritual story. It's a faith story. It's a woman's story. It's a hope story. It's a healing story. It's our miracle story. When Jesus came back, and the scripture tells us in Matthew's version that the guards were watching the tomb as they had been since Friday evening when Jesus' body was placed inside. They wanted to make sure that no one came in and stole the body. And we learned from the story of Lazarus a number of weeks ago that 3 days was the number of days that people waited to believe this one was really, really dead. So the guards didn't want to let anyone out, didn't want to let anyone in, and wanted to make sure that nothing weird was happening. And the women watched. The women watched on the cross. They watched as the body was taken down. They watched as the body was put in the tomb for burial. They watched as the stone was rolled in. And the morning, Sunday morning at dawn, they came back to do what they needed to do, wondering how they were going to move the stone and how they're going to put the work into caring for Jesus' body, which was the woman's job at the time. And they instead were met with stupefied men who, these soldiers, when they saw the angel, they basically passed out. Like, they could not handle it. And the women were shocked, but they were okay with it. They listened and they understood the message. And the message was an angel there saying, go on to Galilee. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And that's very crucial in the story. Don't be afraid. Just go tell everybody, go meet in Galilee the way you're supposed to. The women who had watched and waited and participated the whole time, they hadn't fled with the men on Maundy Thursday. They stayed and they watched, but they had also been traveling with Jesus before. They had heard him predict his death. They heard the whole bit about the temple being destroyed and 3 days later it was going to be rebuilt. They heard all this. So it wasn't completely outside the realm of their expectations that something magical would happen. Didn't dismiss their sorrow at what if, but they were hopeful and they believed. And they met the angel who said, just go to Galilee. Go tell them, go to Galilee. And Jesus called them followers. He called them brothers, which is a word translated in male plural, always includes women and children. And they were asked to come together to continue on the ministry. This is a hope story. Jesus was killed in a political death in the most painful, hideous way possible, the most soul-destroying way the Roman government had. In fact, it was so hideous that the Romans decided it was a punishment that they would not inflict on their own people. That's why Paul never was crucified. They would only do it to their political enemies. That's why the Hebrew people were open game, because the Romans never trusted them. And so Jesus, after experiencing that horrible, horrible death, rose again, came back to life. The political power had no control over this. Death was not the end. There was life afterwards. There was a continuation afterwards. There was a resurrection of possibility afterwards. And what a message in all times, that hope does not end with death. This is a faith story. Anybody who has been following along the gospel, looking at us as we've looked through Matthew this year or looked through the other gospels, looked through anything in the Bible in our faith, we're being asked so many times to believe something that might not make intellectual sense, but it makes spiritual sense. And this is one of those times. The Hebrew people believed in resurrection. They didn't agree on what it looked like, but they agreed it was possible. They knew that there was something beyond death. And here was Jesus showing them that even death on the cross was not enough to stop the truth he was saying, and that truth being love each other, have faith in each other, have faith in God, do the things that matter to society, do the things that bring about the community. When the temple leaders and the Roman leaders wanted to silence that voice, they did not succeed. It is a story of forgiveness. We have Peter denying Jesus, and yet he's also included in the resurrection. Judas, if he hadn't taken his own life, would have been included in the resurrection promise. Go meet in Galilee. Whatever happened, whatever you did, whatever your response was, don't worry about it. We got things to do. Let's go meet in Galilee. So on this Sunday morning, just sink into this beautiful story of faith, of hope, of women as evangelists, women who told the story, women who shared the hope that death is not the end, the faith that God is walking with us no matter what happens to us, no matter how bad it gets. God doesn't create the bad, but God is in the bad, helping us through and giving us hope on the back end. This is a story for us. It's a story of joy and celebration. Have a happy Easter. There's no other way to express it. This is the time of absolute joy, where we know that God's promises are going to be fulfilled without any doubt, because we know that Jesus rose from the dead to show us that God is not going to be stopped by the bad things, but continue walking with us as we move forward into what's new and possible.